Hey, everybody, welcome back to Tech Intersect, your go-to podcast where law, business, and technology intersect with a forward-leaning twist. I am your host, Professor Tanya Evans. Obviously, I'm here to guide you through the complex web of today's digital landscape so that when we are done, I leave you better than I found you, and it's not as complex as they would have you believe. And today we are peeling back the layers of game-changing technology in the legal space. My, spirit animal, predictive coding in eDiscovery. Super excited to talk to Jim about this because although we have talked about a range of artificial intelligence, machine learning, large language model work, we haven't focus specifically on the intersection of discovery. This is a huge topic in law schools as it should be. And so bringing Jim on, who is the visionary founder of eDiscovery AI, is really important. He is a founder whose passion for analytics and revolutionizing how we approach legal discovery is critically important. And with over a decade of experience under his belt and a knack for calculating recall and precision metrics in his sleep. He's laughing, but it was in his bio, so I'm going to go for it. Jim is at the forefront of making the e-discovery process more efficient and precise. We will talk about all of that and more in a moment, but first, Jim, welcome. Welcome, visionary.
Thanks for having me. I got to figure out who wrote that bio. Thank you for the intro.
Outstanding. Well, let's dive in for sure. There's so many things to cover. I hope this is the first of many conversations. Definitely fantastic to have you on to talk about this cutting edge intersection of AI, law, and analytics. And so, first, just share the journey that led you to found eDiscovery AI, your vision for the company's impact on the legal industry, and how you feel that on ramp and that trajectory has gone for you.
Sure. Yeah. So I worked at right out of law school. I did doc review for about a year, and so I have the experience of what that requires.
That's a whole other show.
That's a whole other show. And then I worked at Kroll on Track consulting on the use of technology for about a decade. And so we really, I felt like we really were ahead of the curve on the use of predictive coding. And we had, hundreds of projects, saw so many different things of what types of, not only the hurdles of adopting the technology as we started around, 2010 when it started rolling out, but people weren't quite ready for it, to, the legal side of it, the case law that comes out with the Sullivan and, some rulings. And then, just going through the entire process. And what I felt like was probably some of the most important things is just understanding the roadblocks and what difficulties people have in adopting new technologies. And then further of understanding what are the shortcomings of the predictive coding tools that we have. What things can it not do? Things like, things without text, understanding context, finding key documents. And I ended up leaving Kroll on Track in 2018 and ran my own software company, and we started using AI tools and started using them for classifications. And that really what got us to eDiscovery AI. We really started realizing that this is a really, really great tool for classification of documents, identifying essentially what's relevant. So did a lot of testing and really just identified that this can solve so many problems that we had in the past. All the difficulty around dealing with foreign language, dealing with images, dealing with documents that don't have text, dealing with trying to find the key docs, the smoking gun. So good at it now. And that's,
Wow.
All of the things that we had were reasons why people couldn't use predictive coding. So that's really what led us to here. And I'm just so excited because, I've been listening to people's problems in the eDiscovery world for 10 years. And there were a lot of problems we couldn't solve. We didn't have the tools for it. We didn't have the tech for it. It just didn't work. And now we do. So now we can go back. We can solve so many more problems. We can do it faster, cheaper, and better. And that's just exciting. I mean, to be able to have all of these tools at our disposal that can do things that, frankly, when predictive coding first came out, one of the things someone said to me very early on was, I thought this was just going to be a button where I can just push a button and all my docs are reviewed. And, what is this? I have to train documents. I have to understand things. I have to calculate. Like, I thought this was going to be really easy. And
the easy button.
Right now, I mean, we are at a point where you can describe what you want and push a button and you get it. I mean, it's really, how can it get better than that? I mean,
Right.
the costs will come down, the speed will come up, the accuracy will even better, but this is kind of that holy grail that we've been looking for, and I told, we laughed and said, yeah, maybe in 20 years we'll have that easy button where you just can push one button, have your review done.
Right.
But I mean, we're kind of there. I mean, you describe what you want, push a
Hmm.
button, and it reviews all your documents, and it has, I mean, the accuracy is unbelievable. So that's just really exciting. There's a lot of problems that type of technology can now solve, and we're having a great time just sort of going out there and talking about it and seeing, what types of solutions we can build.
Right. That's really important that you've talked, what the process that you've described is both iterative, but also at some point, having this quantum leap as well. And I don't know if the quantum leap comes from AI finally moving into the public consciousness, because you've been talking about it a long time, and AI has been around a long time. It happens to be on the headlines now. But for first, well, this is a two-part question, but let me ask this first before I get too far ahead of myself. For listeners who may, and you've basically described it, but let's put a fine point on it. For those who are not familiar, explain in layman's terms what predictive coding is, how it's applied in eDiscovery, and then I want to ask a second question about uh, the challenges or roadblocks in adoption, even just having the conversation in an industry that is notoriously slow to adopt everything. It's actually a feature, not a bug, but it is a reality. So, but first, predictive coding, and then talk about having that conversation with the powers that be at law firms.
Yeah. So, I mean, predictive coding really has been something we've been talking about since about 2009, 2010. And it started out using machine learning models, algorithms, logistic regression, SVM, where you would train positive and negative examples to teach the machine what you were looking for relevance. And then the machine would predict which documents would be relevant based on that training. Very much, like a lot of tools we use, Spotify always gets brought up, Amazon, where it's saying that, you liked this, you must also like this. These are the
Hmm.
similarities between them. And that's what you're doing. You're training it on characteristics of a document that makes it relevant and characteristics of documents that are not relevant. And it's learning from that and then basically determining whether or not a document fits better with your relevant examples or your not relevant examples. And it works very well. The results that we're able to get with predictive coding have always been better than human reviewers are capable of by a small margin, not a significant margin, but
Hmm.
it allows a single person to classify a relatively small set of documents, 5, 10,000, and then apply the predictions across all the entire data set. And this is something that originally had a lot of hope and promise. Really, we've seen that the biggest implementations are on those large second requests where you're having very tight deadlines, very large data
Hmm.
volumes. You can have a subject matter expert train and then apply the predictions and validate them, and everything works. And then we started seeing more and more adoption of what's called continuous active learning, or TAR 2.0, or prioritized review, where you're just using the training to prioritize the documents in your review so you get the most relevant documents first. And that's one of those things that really helped further the adoption. So when we talk about what difficulties did we have to overcome in getting adoption of this type of tech, that continuous active learning piece really helped, because now all it is it's just changing the order that you're reviewing documents. Your most relevant
Hmm.
documents are first, and you have an option to stop your review early if you identify every relevant document and you don't want to continue. So
Wow.
we're always looking for, we'll say, easier use cases, ways that we can get people to implement the technology without having to, say, take a lot of risks or have a lot of concerns, kind of being able to get your feet wet in a simple manner. So that's been happening since about 2010. We really had a hard time getting any adoption until the De Silva Moore ruling came out, 2014-ish. I'm not sure the exact date.
Hmm.
Um, but we still, I think the numbers showing, 35 to 40% of projects are using some form of predictive coding to either prioritize the reviewer. We also use it for a lot of other things, where you can take documents that have been coded, you can train a model, and then you can use the predictions to test your doc reviewers. So if you have a
Hmm.
large review team, you can see which reviewers' classifications are disagreeing with the predictions at a higher or lower rate than normal. And then we can address that, and we can look to see if any reviewers are coding things improperly. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's really now taken a huge step forward with the with generative AI coming out now, where before we had to teach it positive and negative examples in order
Mm-hmm.
to train the machine on what's relevant. This is like charades, where if I'm trying to teach you what I'm looking for, and I give you a pile of good docs and a pile of bad docs, and you have to look through and you have to figure out what are the good docs talking about that the bad docs aren't.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, with enough examples, you can get a good understanding of kind of what I'm looking for, what we need to find as relevant docs. But with generative AI, it's like playing charades where you can talk. So I can now just tell the machine, I want to find all documents that discuss these issues. I want to find documents where this person is implying to this person that they should do something illegal, and that just makes it so much easier. So now, instead of training 5,000 positive and negative examples, I can just instruct the machine, click a button, and it will classify all the documents and apply predictions there. So,
Mm-hmm.
that is such a huge step forward. And the accuracy is significantly better. I mean, we were getting 70 to 80% recall with traditional predictive coding, and now with AI review, we're getting 95, 97, 98% recall. And the documents that are, the false negatives that it's getting wrong are very, very borderline, that if you gave that document to 5 different reviewers, you're going to get 5 different classifications.
Mm.
So huge step forward, not only in the quality, but also in the ease of use. And I think that's so important, because I think that one of the biggest hurdles of predictive coding is people find it to be complicated. My perfect example is that when I ask people if they want to use predictive coding, they say no. And if I ask people if they want to prioritize the relevant documents, they say yes. And so it's just that misunderstanding of what predictive coding is and what it can be used for that I think discourages people. And I think that AI just has such an easier adoption from understanding how it works, seeing not only being able to see the results, but the explanations as to why a document is coded a certain way that allows you to update it and correct it. Where if predictive coding is predicting a document that was wrong, there's not an easy path to correct it in the traditional uses. So we've kind of lived through the adoption of traditional predictive coding. It took 4 or 5 years before we really started seeing people going forward, and now we're seeing the same type of thing with using AI in predictive coding. And I
Mm-hmm.
just what I say is that the difference between the two is just night and day. Where in the past it was, wow, predictive coding's cool. Call me when a
Mm-hmm.
judge approves it. Call me when people are using it. It's something that we're not quite ready for, but let me know it's something that's neat. Where
Right. That's a
now
very lawyerly response.
that's it, and and in fairness, we were going from human review to computer review. Huge jump. There wasn't any
Right.
case law around it. It was
Right.
unknown, and so there was a lot of hesitation. But it was very much, call me when this is relevant. And with AI, I mean, people are knocking on the door everywhere. You go to
Right.
every conference, all they do is talk about AI. They joke about if they can talk for 10 minutes without mentioning AI. And I feel like the difference is night and day. There certainly is, that path to adoption is taking time, but it's reasonable. We're
Mm-hmm.
seeing, most large organizations are putting together a panel of experts on their
Mm-hmm.
team that are there to analyze AI options and tools that they can use. Talking to vendors like us and others that will show them tools, demo them, see what works,
Mm-hmm.
and then deciding what path they want to take, what tools they want to use, what things matter, and then going through the security elements that we have to go through with everything, doing a POC to test it.
Mm-hmm.
That whole
And for
process.
those who aren't founders of proof of concept, go ahead.
Yes. And
Mm-hmm.
and that whole process just takes time. And then once they kind of have determined, all right, this is the path we're going to go for, this is our strategy, these are our tools. Now we have to train our internal people, we have to train our salespeople, we have to have everyone ready. So before it was call me when it matters, and now
Mm-hmm.
it's let's start planning what we're going to do.
Good.
So
Right.
it's just a matter of timing. How long is this going to take before we really start seeing mass adoption? Is it going to be 6 months? Is it going to be 12 months? Is it going to be 24, 48? That's something we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But we're still very, very early. And in the case of, we're one of the only tools that's actually alive out there in a production environment right now. And there
Interesting.
are a lot of tools that are coming out soon. Relativity's Air is coming out, a lot of hype around that, a lot of excitement. Other tools are coming out with as well. So we are still so early in the process that there aren't really a lot of tools even available.
Mm-hmm.
So once we start getting to now, tools are available for everyone to use, and now we can start moving. I think that adoption is going to be a lot quicker,
Mm-hmm.
not only because people are knocking on the door asking for it, but it's a lot easier to use and understand.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot more accurate than any other option. And it just makes sense. And as we're getting people comfortable with using generative AI tools for their everyday
To
business,
every day,
I don't know
right?
about you, but I have a window open and it just is there for anything I
Absolutely.
am doing all day. And so
It's yeah. It's really my best employee, quite frankly.
it's
Sorry to
like that
everyone else.
reliable employee that is good at everything and can code and can answer questions and can do
Right.
stuff. So but when you're communicating with a generative AI tool, you're getting feedback that makes sense. You're
Right.
asking questions, they're getting results, and it's something that it's very easy for a person to understand. Where I feel
Mm-hmm.
like machine learning tools are just a lot more unknown black box things that confuse people.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're going from computer review to way better computer review. And that
Absolutely.
step's just not nearly as big of a leap as it was from the humans to computer. And we
Right.
already have the case law saying that using computers to classify documents is absolutely appropriate as long as you're validating your process correctly. The tool
Mm-hmm.
you're using doesn't really matter. It's the validation that you're doing that does. And so I think that it's just going to be a much shorter path, but
Mm-hmm.
it'll still take some time. And we're still seeing people just, we're all heading in the right direction. And I think that's very promising.
Yeah, I feel like there's wind at everyone's back because it's not just a nice to have, it's a need to have. When I think about the competence to practice law, and spend a lot of time talking about it at um, um, my law school. I'm a full tenure professor at Penn State Dickinson Law School,
Hmm.
and I focus on the intersection of. I'm an intellectual property lawyer by training, so even the way I got into Web3 before we were talking about it in that way, or my discipline now, which is the intersection of distributed ledger technology and crypto assets. It's the idea of, oh, this would be a nice, first of all, not a nice to have in their mind. Second of all, I guess nice to have, but who cares? To, oh dear God, why are we behind? No
Mhm.
one has the luxury of time, not only professionally, not only in terms of maintaining the client base that you have and following all of the rules and advancing your bottom line, but as a matter of the competency to practice law includes necessarily, and it's in the code of ethics, the technological competence. And that doesn't just mean Betty, is this thing on, right? That we have to understand and speak in the language to at least identify the issues, because at the end of the day, I practiced in big law for 10 years before I started teaching. And I've been teaching for almost 16 years at this point. That the idea of where you are, we don't have the luxury of time to wait. And we also don't have the luxury of time to have legal somewhere down the hall or in another part of the building, or if you have legal counsel coming in, that can't be the last conversation that you have. And by the time they get to you, we're problem solving, we're issue spotting, and we don't have time for a 40-page legal opinion. It's a text, it's an email, and you cannot move at the speed of life at this point if you are not technologically competent, not just in what is happening today, but what is coming down the pike. I want to pause for a minute because you said so much, and there's so many things I want to make sure that we don't um, miss, because what you said is critically important. One thing that I took a note of is the word tool that you continue to use, which is really important. But what you also said is you were problem solving to make sure you weren't just giving your potential and actual clients what you know they need, but what you know they want. And so moving away from focusing from a marketing point of view on the tool to the pain point followed by the result, right? And then that also made me think about the iterative process of generative AI that allows you to have this conversation. This is how I think of it: a conversation with a really smart friend that changes every time I need them to change. And the level of nuance that's required in understanding prompting.
Mhm.
Talk a bit about that, because it isn't just an easy button, but you can easily get to your result if you're having the conversation. It makes me, final point, and then the time is yours. When I was thinking about like Boolean searches and using the right terms, et cetera. But it from a user interface and experience point of view, that's just not going to work. And what I feel now, it's conversational and we're iterating even and clarifying to get you what you need as an output. So kind of talk about that process too.
Yeah, and I mean it's a skill just like anything else.
Right.
Just like generating keywords, but honestly, it's so much easier than anything else. I mean, creating Boolean keyword searches is a
Mhm.
skill, and that's way more complex than this. This
Absolutely.
is just describing what you want, and people, we're describing. I tell people what I want all the time. But honestly, the real secret is to just use it.
Mhm.
We I use it for everything from, generating ideas for names for our pets to coming up with stories for my kid before bed. Where prompting really probably matters the most is in image generation tools.
Mm.
And my kid loves just describing things and then having him create it. And it's always
Oh,
draw a unicorn jumping over a rainbow. Now draw back, and it's crazy kids' ideas that they just can draw out in a second. And so
love it.
um, I definitely think that the first thing anyone needs to do is just try it. Go out there,
Hmm.
ask questions, ask what it can do. It's incredible at generating images. It's incredible at ideas.
Mm.
Um, Brainstorming ideas is another huge one where we're coming up with ideas for ads, ideas for blogs, ideas for in the legal industry, even just you can say, here's my case. Tell me some arguments I should be considering.
Right.
And the thing that really kills me is that there's this fear of AI and that it's going to be somehow misused or not properly used in cases. And you hear the cases where someone cited a case that wasn't real, and you hear this,
Yes.
and
The
and
hallucination fear,
I
right?
just need to say, did you think that you can have AI write a paper for you and then file it without reading it?
Right.
Because I mean, I didn't think that. I didn't. No one I know thinks that. Like, it's
Never crossed my
there.
mind.
That's where it's like, yes, if AI writes a motion for you, anything, you have to read it first.
First.
I mean, that and you have to understand that the arguments it's making are correct or proper. It's basically creating a draft for you to now use as a basis for what you're going to write. It usually gets you 90% of the way there, but you should
Right.
always be reading through it, refining it, and most importantly, validating that what it's saying is correct. And if it's citing a case, you should be looking at that case and seeing how it matters. The one thing that I think is really important for lawyers to just understand, which I think they all know, so it's not
Mm.
like this is revolutionary, is that using any tools does not absolve you of your responsibility as an attorney to be standing behind the work you perform.
Mm.
If you have an intern that writes a motion for you and you file that motion without reading it, and that motion is citing a case that's not real, it's on you. You don't
Right.
get to say, oh, it's not my fault, my intern made it. So that's the same thing here, is you're using AI to guide you, to allow you to create content and materials. And so
Hmm.
early on, that can be just simply, give me some ideas for arguments to consider for this type of case. Give me
Hmm.
some backgrounds on things that allow you to then start your research and start working on it much faster. Um, you can have it write an outline for a motion, or you can have it write, different legal drafts, but it's a starting point that you're using then to
Hmm.
write it yourself and update it to what you need with yourself. And that's where, if you look at it from that standpoint, I don't see any risks of you're not you certainly aren't going to file something that's not real because you've read everything, you've created everything. So I mean, just to
Hmm.
go back to where we started, I think that going into sign up for ChatGPT, pay the $20 a month if you don't to not use the
Please.
free version,
Right.
and have it ask it questions, have it tell you how to change the oil in your car, have it I use it for programming so frequently now
Yeah.
because it allows it allows you to basically have a really, really quick outline and structure for any program.
Hmm.
And I go to a retirement village in Arizona every year, and I give a
Hmm.
class on technology, and I did
Oh.
blockchain one year and then AI the next year, and I did
Hmm.
AI last year. And the same thing with them. It's go in there, have it write a story for your kids.
Mm.
You could have it, I can say, write me a bedtime story that involves a princess that takes over the world or saves the day in this situation. And it creates it on the fly. And now you have a bedtime story where your kid is the star. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of things like that where it's fun. It's something that we've never had tools that could do this. And it really
Right.
starts helping you understand how the process works of I'm requesting information in some way and it's providing it with an answer. And understanding how you provide that clarification of
Mm-hmm.
simplifying your request to kind of break down the steps in some instances. But
Mm-hmm.
that's the best way to do it. Get experience on things. I always say you should always be getting experience on things that don't matter before you jump into a tool and use it when it does. Don't have your first case using AI be your biggest case of your life.
Right.
And that's where with predictive coding, people would use it on second request. And it's like, don't have this be your first use.
Right.
Use it on a small matter. Use it to compare your reviewers. Make sure you understand it when the stakes are very low. So then when the stakes are high, you're already knowledgeable about what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's like the approach that you would take to driving, right? At
Yeah,
15
yeah.
and a half,
We
you
don't
got
go on the
your
highway.
license.
We're not.
We are in the parking lot with no other cars. Not even in the
It's just
cones at first, right?
spin
Right.
around, have it right. I have it right. Thank you cards to my grandma. I have it right things that
Oh.
just being able to have it generate content that's really helpful.
And that you
Formatting.
care about, right?
Yeah.
Because once you care
And
about it, you want to learn a bit more and more as well. And the stakes are less high because as lawyers, practicing lawyers, the stakes are kind of high. Life,
and
liberty.
I'm still gonna read it before I send it to my grandma. That.
Awesome, awesome. Well, before we get out of here, I was interviewed yesterday, actually. We're talking about a lot of things that were the head of the news. I was a guest co-host on another show, and the topic came up of this is not directly relevant to this technology per se, but also does incorporate AI in some capacity. And it was about the use of scanners on subway platforms, et cetera, to identify weapons in
Hmm.
New York. And so we're talking about that and all of the issues that it raises, for example, around bias. Even the owner of the company and the creator of this particular software is like, it's not great underground. They're misidentifying and it's having a disparate impact on populations of color, et cetera. Other technology I can think of, I travel a ton almost every week, and going through the issue of whether or not my hands, if you're just listening, I'm a dark brown complected woman, of being able to get the sensors to work. It makes me think of oximeters in the medical field, right? So this is always an issue when you are teaching something. It requires our human input in order to have these outputs, and unintentionally, intentionally, wherever the output is going to be reflected of what the input is. Have you had conversations about that, particularly given the impact and sometimes the disparate impact of the legal system and the consequences of that on communities of color or other marginalized communities as you build out the product?
Yeah, and there's obviously been a lot of discussion about that. Frankly, for our use case, it's not a huge factor because we're literally just saying, look at this document and tell me if it's relevant. So it's not really stating a lot, but there are a lot of use cases where that is something that you definitely need
Mm,
to consider. The biggest one that I think is, talking about using it in the, criminal justice system as a
mm,
sentencing guideline. This is something I think it was like 5 years ago in a conference in Switzerland. They were talking about using computers to essentially provide sentencing, where you can feed in the criteria, and then it would provide sentencing and whether or not that sentencing would be biased based on past biases that were in the sentencing that came up. And
mm,
that absolutely, I think, is the case. And I think, like anything, you just have to kind of be aware of what situations might occur in,
right.
and be cognizant of what we need to do. And for the legal industry, I still always am going to say, have it create something for you, and then use that as a guide or an aid to create your own content and material.
Mm,
And so, hopefully, in that you should be able to be able to overcome any biases that it may have created originally, because you're still the creator of the content that you're
Right.
ultimately producing. But in a lot of use cases where we are automating a lot of things in ways that can be kind of scary. One thing that we're working with is, image, now that we can review images, we can do a lot of things like we have security camera footage where we're taking, we're tracking the security camera and we're flagging certain issues. So in a construction site, if someone doesn't have a, hard hat on, it's flagging it. It's logging how many people are on the site at any given time, so they can just look back and they can see how many people were present in each situation. But also flagging things. I mean, we're not looking for weapons, though maybe we should be. But flagging situations where there's an unsafe condition. There's a red flag. I was just joke, like if a Wolverine runs through your construction site, having that flagged. But being able to essentially monitor and flag outliers, and in those situations, how is bias going to be played in? Because there's not that human element to be the buffer between the AI and the output. And so that's where I definitely would think the concerns are going to be in cases where you're relying on the output that AI generates without any human review or any vetting. And that's where I think you just have to be careful. You have to make sure that you're testing it thoroughly to make sure that there's not any really strong biases that are going to actually affect the performance of whatever tool you're creating. But just like anything, be aware of the risks and pros. But ultimately, even in this type of tool, you're testing it hundreds of thousands of times, and you should be able to be aware of any of those issues. I mean, I've heard of too many examples where it just wasn't tested, and that's certainly great. One of the biggest ones was they were using tools to with document review, where your camera has to be on and you have to be looking at the screen, or else it logs you out of the tool. And they didn't test it with anyone of color, and basically could not recognize anyone with darker skin. And that just, to me, feels like a failure on the testing of vetting your technology before it goes out the door, and not really thinking about that. Why would you not be testing it with different types of faces if you're using it to recognize faces? And same with the subway, like you should be testing it on the cool thing about technology now is, I can go back and I can take subway footage from the last 10 years and I can run the technology across that. And I can very, very thoroughly test it in a way that should bring up all those issues. And a lot of things that we're seeing now are simply replacing a human element. And we have years of the human doing the work that we can test it against. And that's really, really helpful for eliminating any potential issues.
I think that's great, because you're seeing, it makes me think when we first entered the digital revolution, and now we are at that point decades later where we say, all right, we have a ton of data. We've clicked a lot of check boxes to get a free something. And so let's take a look back at all of this data. I have to have you back because I'd love to continue the conversation around questions of security and privacy. And like each of those could be their own episode, to be sure. I think this is a really important first conversation for my listeners and viewers to have this at the fore of their mind. All of the considerations, and what I love to do on the show is to talk about the promise and the power and the pitfalls to make sense, because technology is ultimately should be this tool, a toolbox of tools, of agnostic tools. What we build will depend on the way that we use them. And so you made some really important points about that. But please, Jim, share what's next for eDiscovery AI and how folks can learn more about you and the company and your work.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, the best part about this is we don't really know what's next. We are, I don't want to say reactionary, but we are here to solve problems. And the problems that come to us, you kind of don't know what's going to happen, but we're here to use a tool belt of solutions to solve everyday problems that are coming across the legal industry and eDiscovery. And ultimately, we don't know where that's going to end up. Our focus right now is on the document review and classification, which is just such a huge part of eDiscovery. I mean, most of the money that's spent on eDiscovery is in that phase, so that's really where we're going now. But we just started building tools for data breach and other things that are real significant problems in the industry and a lot of really great options we have to help now. And the best way to learn about us, go to our website, eDiscoveryAI.com, and sign up for a demo. We do just have where you can schedule a demo right on the site, pick a time that works for you, and then you can see how it works, ask questions about different types of cases. Because ultimately, what we're building is based on what people are coming to us and saying they need. And there's a lot of use cases that I think that we haven't considered yet, or solutions that just haven't, we haven't faced the problem yet. But that's where the fun comes. The fun is building new things to solve new problems, and I love just knowing that where that leads us is kind of unknown, and that's exciting.
Jim Sullivan, eDiscovery AI, and you got in there early, so you got an awesome domain name. I'm also going to have you back because you're an OG in kind of the crypto space too. So I need to ask you if you're Satoshi. We'll talk about that next time. But until then, thank you. You are now not only a friend of the show, but also a family member, and I look forward to future conversations.
Thank you so much for having me.